why.
From inside the MASN newsroom, it is the MASN All Access Podcast. Paul Mancano, joined in person, in human, in flesh, by Brendan Mortensen, no longer on a Zoom call from the MASN safe house somewhere in an undisclosed location. Actually here, Brendan, this is fun stuff. You're back in Baltimore.
Yeah, well, the last time I came back to Baltimore, the entire season almost got canceled. So I'm hoping that me coming back now doesn't cancel the offseason. Honestly, it might have. There haven't been any free agency signings. Yeah. So maybe I did cancel the offseason and I just don't know it yet.
Probably. Yeah. It has been a freezingly cold stove.
Yes.
So very well. Could go that way. Brendan, this your in-person appearance reminds me of during the election coverage, I went down some YouTube rabbit holes of looking back to previous election coverage.
As one does.
I like to
look as
back
one does,
at
sure.
the production of like how news stations covered this stuff. And I watched in 2000, I think it was CNN, had somebody on a hologram of somebody on set. And it was like Wolf Blitzer talking to this person. He was like, well, we're beaming you up, Scotty, and it was like a hologram. And they're like, well, this is probably the future of the coverage that we're going to have. And that is something that has never translated. I've never been watching any news broadcast and they've had a holographic or hologram of a human being on set. It is just something that did not make the transition. So you are not a hologram. You're actually a physical person.
No, you still caught me on that is quite the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
There.
No, it's
you were watching hologram coverage.
Well, they thought that it was
past elections.
They thought it was like the future, and they were rolling with it.
It's like all the movies from the 1980s that are like, this is what 2020 is going to look like.
Yeah.
And it's all like the flying cars.
Yeah.
And,
no, the Terminator is not. Has the year for the Terminator passed yet? Like the year that it was supposed to happen?
That's a good question.
I think it was supposed to be like 2014 or something like that.
If you know what year the Terminator was in the future.
In the future, yeah.
Please let us know.
Exactly.
Yeah. 1984
was not 1984. Well, Brendan, the reason we didn't have a podcast last week was because I lost my voice for, I thought it was going to be something awful. It really wasn't, and I was able to get it fixed really quickly. But it was probably the best week of, my girlfriend's year, not having to hear me talk for a week.
Yeah.
So, but I'm
zing.
We'll stand up there. All right, Brendan, we got a lot to talk about here on this podcast because we have been off the air for about 2 weeks, and we're going to talk about some Orioles stuff. Later on in the show, I'm also going to have my former boss, my former coworker, your former boss, your former coworker, Olivia Witherite, on to discuss an article that she wrote for The Athletic about the Marlins hiring Kim Ang as their GM, an awesome, historic hire, and her reaction to that. But first, Brendan, the deadline for the additions to the 40-man roster are Friday. We know that Mike Elias likes to take things right down to the deadline, as he did with the Jose Iglesias picking up his option a couple weeks ago. Now the Orioles have 35 guys on their roster, and they have to protect probably at least 5 guys in order to make sure that they're not taken in Yusniel Diaz, Michael Baumann, Zach Lowther, Rylan Bannon, Alexander Wells. And there's a 6th guy in Isaac Mattson that they currently do not have room for in their roster, and they have 2 days. Do you think that they're going to open up a roster spot to save a spot for Isaac Mattson?
I think they have to. When you look at Mattson, he is so close to the major league level at this point that if another team is looking for guys to pick up in the Rule 5 draft, you would have to imagine that he gets selected. I would be shocked if he didn't.
Especially considering how cash-strapped teams are going to be.
Right.
To get somebody this cheap who hasn't made his debut yet and could be a piece in your bullpen in 2021.
And who was very good in the minors. Yes. In 2019, across 3 levels, he had a 2.33 ERA. So that's somebody who could come up to a major league team right now and make an impact. And I think if you're the Orioles, too, there's got to be a little bit of incentive there to keep Mattson because of the deal that you got him in. I think it would be a bad look, like we said, if you don't keep Mattson, who was one of the better pieces in the deal that you got for Dylan Bundy. If you don't keep Mattson at that point, are you basically just saying, okay, we lost that deal, we'll just fold it in?
Well, what could happen is they could not protect him and he doesn't get taken, which would be
That's a big risk, though.
Huge risk.
Yes.
It's a huge risk, and frankly, I don't think that's one that they probably should make. They might try to make it. I thought last year, honestly, this is probably just they obviously know much better about what teams are looking for in the Rule 5 draft and which teams might take guys, who they might take. But I thought last year that there was a chance Cody Sedlock might have gotten taken just because he was a former first-round pick.
Right.
He did not get taken, and he mostly, I think, because he was just not close to Major League ready. He was still with the team that he was still with, I think, Frederick at that point in 2019. So maybe they know something that we don't, but I think as it goes along, I think there is going to be, over the coming 48 hours or so, I think they are going to add him.
I think they have to. You mentioned Sedlock, and he just wasn't really close to the Major League level, but Matson's right there. I think if you called up Matson to the team next year, he is going to make an impact in a Major League bullpen, regardless of whether it's the Orioles or another team. I think he's too good not to call up at this point.
Yeah.
And I think you have to protect him, because I would be shocked if he was not selected.
So who would they take off the 40-man if they are going to add him?
That's a good question, because there's not a lot of room left.
There's no. I mean, I think they have to add Diaz, Bauman, Lowther, Bannon, Wells.
Right.
I think
maybe that's the
I'm looking
time
at the
for
40-man.
Pat Valaika.
Yeah, I'm looking at the 40-man. I think it's probably Pat Valaika. Could be Ramon Urias.
Austin Wins.
Austin Wins, I would say yes if they weren't short on catcher with Brian Holiday being a free agent at this point. Because other than that, they only have Pedro Severino and Chance Sisco. And I think there's a chance, because Severino is arbitration eligible this offseason, that he is going to be either non-tendered or traded.
I think
they want to keep Wins.
I would say the two favorites in my mind right now would be Pat Valaika or maybe Cole Sulser. Because if you're keeping Matson, he probably has a spot in the Orioles bullpen. So it would make sense to make room for Matson and to get rid of a bullpen arm. Yeah. So he naturally is kind of filling that spot.
Exactly.
So maybe Matson and Cole Sulser gets DFA'd, but I think out of anyone, it would be a toss-up, in my mind at least, between Sulser and Pat Valaika.
And then eventually, I think December 2nd or December 1st is the deadline where they have to set their 40-man roster before the Rule 5 draft, so that if they want to add somebody, they have to clear room off that 40-man roster. So they could add these 5 guys and Matson and get it to exactly 40, and then they might have to non-tender somebody or trade somebody if they want to make a pick in the Rule 5 draft.
But I think you would assume that you want to keep at least one spot there for the Rule 5 draft.
I would think so, too. So one of these, it might be Pat Valaika and Ramon Urias. It might be Pat Valaika and Cole Sulser.
Because there's certainly a scenario where we would be surprised if Isaac Matson was not kept. Maybe another team makes a surprising decision and doesn't keep somebody like an Isaac Matson. And if you're Mike Elias, I'm sure you probably want to have the flexibility on your 40-man roster to take somebody in the Rule 5 draft if somebody great is there.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens over the next 48 or so hours, is Mike Elias. But he said with the Jose Iglesias edition that if you are afforded time to make a decision, use as much time as you can, which is what a lot of people, a lot of past presidents have said that as well. Use all the time afforded to you to try to make a decision, Brendan.
Wow.
It's good life advice. Yep.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the pieces that have come back in some trades. We've started to see some players to be named later added, because it is officially later, and they have named these players. I think most importantly, the Tommy Milone trade. The Orioles got back the 2 players to be named later. They were named. And I am shocked, Brendan, shocked at how high a quality they got back in this trade.
Yeah. I think everybody was.
They got a top 30 prospect.
For Tommy Milone.
They got a top 30 prospect in A.J. Graffinino,
right?
Who is granted the 30th best prospect in the Orioles system since coming over from the Braves system.
Top 30 nonetheless.
Top 30. That designation counts. I think, unfortunately, Caden Grenier got knocked off the list as he was number 30. So A.J. Graffinino comes right into the organization. And the other guy that they got is a second baseman named Greg Cullen. Both of these guys are 23 years old. Let's start with Graffinino, a shortstop by trade who did not play with the exception of one game and one at-bat in the 2019 season because he was dealing with concussion issues. In a post that was explained on MASNsports.com by Rockabacco. So he missed really the entire 2019 season. So all we have to go by is the 2018 season for AJ Graffinino, but pretty solid season.
Yeah, and you've got a crowded shortstop room right now with the Orioles prospects. There are a lot of guys near the top of the prospect list that are at that shortstop position. You just added Terrin Vavra via trade as well. So I would be surprised if Graffinino is somewhere near the top of that list. But for shortstop, like I've mentioned with the other guys, it's such a premium position that as many rolls of the dice as you can have, that's just going to benefit you. And you gave up somebody in Tommy Milone who probably was not going to be on the Orioles next season, if I had to guess. And he really didn't do a ton for you while he was on the team. So the fact that you get a top 30 prospect, yes, he is number 30, but that's still a very good return for Tommy Milone.
Milone only made 3 starts for them.
Right.
He appeared in 3 games and had a double-digit ERA. Was really bad for them. And part of that was his first start against the Phillies where he really got hit around, so that didn't affect it.
For the Braves, yeah.
Yes, for the Braves. That affected it poorly. But, I mean, this is a great return. A great return for a guy that you signed on the first or second day of spring training in Sarasota to a minor league contract, started opening day for you, and you got AJ Graffinino and Greg Cullen. Now, we'll see what these guys turn into. Graffinino, he's the son of a big league infielder, Tony Graffinino, who he's an 8th-round pick, and actually through his father, he was able to meet and work with J.J. Hardy, who ended up being a great mentor
Orioles
for him.
legend, J.J.
Orioles
Hardy.
legend, J.J. Hardy, and was a great mentor for him when he was literally a little kid, just growing up playing baseball. He seems, I mean, if you haven't read the article by Rockabacco, AJ seems like a great kid, very smart kid, was very successful back in 2018 in the Braves organization. The Rome Braves is their single A affiliate. He, in 37 games there, he hit over 300, 333 on base percentage, had just 1 homer. But his fielding is supposed to be superb. It's graded as a 60 on a scale of 20 to 80 by scouts. So he is supposed to be a terrific infield defender in addition to maybe providing a little bit with the bat.
Yeah, and I think he probably profiles at a big league level, not as an everyday shortstop, but even if you get a solid utility guy who is good defensively at shortstop, maybe you can try him at second base, third base, because he is a little bit of an oversized shortstop, so maybe he'd fit well at third. But if you get a solid utility guy for a few years at the big league level for Tommy Milone, you'll take that.
Yeah, and Greg Cullen is the other guy who's just kind of a bonus. Also played on that Rome Braves team in 2019, a lot more games under his belt for them. 130 games, hit 270, 9 homers. Not a whole lot of scouting on him out there, but he is more the size of an infielder. He's 5'10" as opposed to 6'2" for AJ Graffinino. But from what I have read, that he just kind of is an all-around player, pretty solid defensively and pretty solid at the plate, as his numbers indicate. So Greg Cullen and AJ Graffinino coming back in that Tommy Milone trade, better than I expected.
Yeah, I think better than most people expected. I think from pretty much any measure, the Orioles won this trade.
Well, and especially because what we're seeing with a lot of these players to be named later, and I think what we expected, is that a lot of them are recent international signees, because that just makes the most sense. Because if they're players to be named later, as we know, they could not be named, a lot of them, because they were not at the alternate site for their team. So they're probably going to be lower-level prospects. All right, Brendan, you have a little thing for us to talk about.
I do.
Short-term, long-term?
Short-term, long-term. So looking at the Orioles in the offseason right now, they are probably not going to make any big free agent splashes. I think Jose Iglesias was probably the most action we're going to see from the Orioles. I think we could see maybe a veteran starter in the 5th spot in the rotation, maybe, and then, of course, they're going to sign Corey Kluber. But I think Jose Iglesias is probably the big action we're going to see. So the 2021 Orioles, aside from the prospects that get called up, are probably going to be a pretty similar team to the 2020 Orioles, so we can look at who played certain positions there. And the game I have is 3 categories, or if you want to cheat, I cheated on a couple. But the 3 categories that I want to try to group guys into, we've got problems, short-term solutions, and long-term solutions. And for position groups that don't have a long-term solution on the current roster, who would that long-term solution be? Is it somebody who's already on the roster, maybe a prospect? Is it a position that the Orioles need to address in free agency or via trade? That's the game.
My question is, does it have to be at this position? Could somebody be a long-term solution at a different position than the one that they're currently playing?
Not necessarily, because I think a guy like Ryan Mountcastle, he's a left fielder as of right now. I have him as a long-term solution at first base. So I think it doesn't necessarily need to be
that is why
a corner
I
outfield. Yeah. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
All right, let's start with catcher, Paul. What do you got?
You got Pedro Severino and Chance Sisco.
Yeah.
Splitting time for the most part. I think Pedro Severino played the majority of games pretty much and would be going forward if he has kept. But I think the reason that I just mentioned him being a potential trade piece, a potential non-tender this offseason, is because I think that he is more a short-term problem at this point. I think that he showed tremendous flashes in the first half of the season, first half All-Star in 2020, but he really still has not been consistent at the plate. And I think that he is, especially with Brian Holiday on the roster, now no longer, I think Severino was probably the worst defensive catcher on the roster. I think Sisco made strides defensively. I think even Severino got a little bit better last year defensively, but I don't think he was good enough. And I still don't think he's good enough to be an everyday catcher. And, of course, they have Adley Rutschman waiting in the wings, so I think that this just kind of negates this whole it kind of just eliminates this whole conversation. But I would put Pedro Severino in the short-term problem spot.
Yeah, the long-term solution at the catcher spot for the Orioles is really clear. It's Adley Rutschman, and he is probably going to be making his debut, we hope, maybe in the latter half of 2021. So the question with Pedro Severino and Chance Sisco becomes, okay, are they good enough to play the first half of 2021 to be your starter somewhere? And when Adley Rutschman is your most everyday catcher, which one of them is a more valuable backup? And I think of the two, I would say that I would probably rather have Chance Sisco as a backup right now than I would have Pedro Severino, because you're probably not going to be looking for as much offensive production in a backup catcher. Severino gives you more offensively. He hit .250 with 5 home runs in 2020, but Sisco is 2 years younger, and he's a much better defender. So I would say Severino probably falls into the problem category, where I think Sisco falls into the category of a short-term solution, and more of a short-term solution for being a backup, not necessarily for being the starting catcher for the O's.
Water gun to your back. Does Pedro Severino get traded, non-tendered, or is he back in the Orioles in 2021?
I think he's back with the Orioles because Adley Rutschman just isn't on the team yet, and I think you want both Pedro Severino and Chance Sisco to be contributing at the first half of 2021. I think the ideal scenario for the O's is maybe Pedro Severino plays well offensively like he did at the beginning of 2020, to the point where he has a little bit of trade value at the trade deadline for somebody who's maybe looking for a backup catcher, a DH maybe, because Pedro Severino doesn't give you a ton of value defensively at the catcher spot. Maybe they're looking for a DH. So I think best case scenario, he plays well enough to garner some trade value somewhere else, and then once Adley Rutschman comes up, you can just use Chance Sisco as your backup catcher.
I think he is estimated to make about $1.7 million in arbitration this year per MLB trade rumors. I think if I had to guess right now, I think that he gets either non-tendered or traded, but I don't know what kind of trade value he would have at this point.
I just think he stays on the team because you're going to be hard-pressed to find a second catcher somewhere.
Yeah, and you do need one.
And you need one. You can't just have Chance Sisco rolling into the year.
Well, you could have Chance Sisco and Austin Wynns if you want to bring. But I think the fact that he did not make an appearance in a game last year and they went with Brian Holiday as their third catcher, I think speaks to what the organization kind of thinks of him.
Right.
And if they can get a cheaper option on the market, they might try to do that. But yeah, I think it's going to be, they're going to have to get some guys at catcher, regardless, because Adley Rutschman is not going to be starting opening day, unfortunately, in 2021.
But he'll be there at some point, and it's pretty clear that he is the long-term solution. Yeah. Another position that I have a long-term solution for, I already gave it away, but that's first base going around the diamond. Ryan Mountcastle, I think, is the long-term solution there. I don't see him as the long-term solution in left field. He's okay defensively in left field, but I think he can develop as a pretty good first baseman defensively, even if he's not in a corner outfield spot. I think first base is a better position for him, like we saw with Trey Mancini. Trey Mancini was decent in right field, not amazing, but I think he profiles better at first base. So I have Mountcastle as the long-term solution there. I think he's also the short-term solution because he probably will be the 2021 first baseman for the O's if I had to guess. I can't imagine they would keep putting him in left field with the amount of outfielders that you'll have healthy for next season. And I think Mancini is also, he's teetering on the line for me between short-term solution and long-term solution. He's definitely a solution. Long-term, I think maybe Trey Mancini, 3-4 years down the road, I don't know. But for right now, Trey Mancini is giving you a lot of value at that first base DH spot. So I think Mancini is certainly a solution. I'm just not sure how long-term it is.
Well, we haven't talked much at all on this podcast, and understandably, about what we can expect from Trey Mancini next year, because obviously we have been more focused on him just getting through chemotherapy treatments and him most recently now getting back into the cage and taking swings, which is awesome to see. But at some point, we're going to have to see if he is the same level of player in 2021, and there are no guarantees that he is. In theory, we were talking about last year adding you reintegrate Trey Mancini into this lineup, and what a powerful lineup that could be. Hopefully, Trey is the same guy, but we don't know that at this point because it is so much to undergo what he has undergone over the past year or so, or 8 months or whatever it has been since March, and for him to come back is amazing for him to just get back on the field, and it is fully expected that he will do that. But we just don't know if he's going to be the same guy, and that's understandable, of course, and especially after missing a year. I mean, he's going to miss a year of baseball. He can work out, but he has not taken swings in a batting cage for months. So he can work this offseason, but he does have some catching up to do. So I think that the question of whether he can be a long-term or short-term solution for them is going to depend on what we see from him in 2021.
Yeah, it's to be determined. Yeah. I think we're going to see what we get from Trey Mancini in the 2021 season. Regardless, it's awesome that the Orioles are going to be getting any production out of Trey Mancini.
Yeah.
For what he has been through. Seeing Trey Mancini on the field for the Orioles again is going to be fantastic. Everybody is really looking forward to it, and I think there will be an evaluation period there to see if he's a long-term solution somewhere. I'm being optimistic that I think he will be somewhere between that first base DH spot. The other guys who saw time at first base last season, I think Chris Davis is obviously a problem with the contract situation there. Don't need to spend a ton of time on Chris Davis. Renato Nunez is an interesting one. I have him as a short-term solution at DH, but we've talked about it before. I think there's a chance that Renato Nunez is kind of the odd man out with the crowded outfield, with the crowded first base spot. I don't know how much value Nunez is going to give you, but as long as he's on the roster, I think he gives you enough production from a DH role that he is a short-term solution at first base. He's
maybe
not good defensively at first base.
I don't think I don't think he's a problem. He's not a problem as a designated hitter right now, but the only thing that's problematic is the fact that he's another arbitration-eligible guy, and he does not have a clear defined spot in 2021 other than DH, which he may be competing for if they put Mountcastle at first, and if they have Trey Mancini back as DH. So he just may not have a spot for him, and that's less of a knock on him, and it's more just about, the fact that they just don't really have a spot for Renato Nunez most likely in 2021. So I just don't at this point. We've talked about it. I don't anticipate him coming back. I think they could trade him, but if he does, I guess a short-term solution at DH.
Yeah, he's a power bat in the middle of the lineup, if nothing else.
Yeah. All right. Second base, Hanser Alberto.
I have Hanser as a short-term solution.
Yeah, me too.
I think he is probably not going to be your long-term answer at second base. He does hit for pretty decent average. He had 283 last season, but had kind of a down year from what we were expecting, I think. I think we were expecting that average to even be a little bit higher than 283. The OPS under 700 wasn't great. He hit 305 in 2019, and I think people were expecting him to hit closer to the 300 range, at least what you were hoping for. But either way, I think your long-term solution at second base is probably a prospect. I would imagine that there are going to be some of those shortstop prospects that we talked about that just don't pan out necessarily at shortstop, but maybe you can move them over to second base and see if they give you any value there. I can't see Hanser Alberto being the long-term answer at second base for the Orioles, but for right now, I think he's serviceable enough at second base, at least for 2021 and maybe 2022.
Yeah, if you were to ask me who I think the second baseman will be in 2022 or 2023, Hanser Alberto or the field, I would take the field.
Right.
Because I think that Gunnar Henderson, probably more of a third baseman if he does move, but you have Gunnar Henderson, you have Terrin Vavra, who's playing in the outfield now, Jordan Westberg. You have all these guys that are right there now, all of a sudden, that could be your Rylan Bannon, even, who we could see in 2021, could be a long-term solution at second base. There is a chance, I think, Hanser gets traded also this offseason. I don't think he'll get non-tendered, but I think there's a chance because he's another arbitration-eligible guy. So we're going to be bringing up a lot on this podcast, but I agree. I think he's a short-term solution at this point, but he's a really fun one to watch.
He is. If I were to put my money on a 2023 Orioles second baseman, I would probably say Rylan Bannon.
2023? Yeah,
2023.
He's the biggest contender at this point. But we'll see what the other guys do through the organization.
Right. That's kind of how I'm organizing my. Are they a long term or a short term? Long term for me is if they are on the Orioles opening day lineup in 2023.
The only thing I think is Bannon doesn't have the ceiling that Westberg, Vavra,
right,
Henderson have.
But for now, Hanser Alberto, short term solution.
Yeah.
I think at second base, third base. I think there's a lot of problems at third base.
Yeah.
Is what I have. Rio Ruiz, I categorize as a problem. Yolmer Sanchez, I also categorize as a problem, not because I don't think he's a decent utility guy, but if Yolmer Sanchez is your answer at third base, that's not the correct answer.
Yeah, and he may not even be on the team in 2021.
Right.
I mean, Mike Elias gave out some praise for him when they picked him up off waivers, but also said, yeah, but it's early in the offseason, so we might put him back on waivers and he could disappear in a month or so. So, Rio Ruiz I thought there was a real chance. I was optimistic on him going into the 2020 season. We saw how great he was in spring training. He was gangbusters to start the season, and he really fell off the map. So I think that this is a clear problem area for the Orioles at this point. It's the reason they picked up Yolmer Sanchez, I think. And this fits into the same category of you have these shortstop, infield prospects at this point who are still at the lower levels, maybe changing positions at some point. Maybe this is a spot for Gunnar Henderson, Jordan Westberg, Terrin Vavra, those type guys.
Yeah, that would be my guess for long-term solution is one of Jordan Westberg or Gunnar Henderson.
Yeah,
is who I said for the long-term answer at third base. Ruiz is tough because he shows you flashes of the third baseman you really want Rio Ruiz to be.
Yeah.
And then he just goes on these cold streaks, and he's had enough opportunities at this point where, if he doesn't come out at the beginning of the 2021 season and look unbelievable, I think it's probably time to look elsewhere.
Well, and we saw him make improvements in some areas. His power was much better. He got huge during the shutdown. But his plate discipline has to improve. And unless it improves quickly, he's kind of fighting for a roster spot at that point. All right, so we've gone around shortstop.
Yeah, last infield spot.
Yep.
Jose Iglesias, I think, is pretty clearly a short-term solution.
Yep.
Iglesias, I would be surprised if he was on the Orioles past this season, unless you want to sign him to another one-year deal. But Iglesias provides you a lot offensively, apparently, which nobody thought he would. And he's a really solid defensive shortstop. He's not going to be the answer in 2023. Again, we've talked about it for 3 different positions now, but the depth that the Orioles have at the shortstop position in their prospects is fantastic, and I would be shocked if one of those guys doesn't pan out to be a really good shortstop at the major league level. So I think one of those guys is going to be your long-term answer. But for right now, you're happy with Jose Iglesias at shortstop. And Richie Martin backing him up, I don't think he's quite a problem, and I don't think he's quite a solution. I think you'll probably look to upgrade there as a backup.
I think another guy that 2021 will tell, because we haven't gotten a year of him, and they were hopeful that he would make improvements on his rookie year in 2020, and we just didn't get to see him play.
Shortstop as a whole for the Orioles, short term, you're looking good.
Yeah, I think so. Well, long term, I think you're looking good too.
That is well.
We'll see what pans out. All right, let's go to the outfield.
Outfield is a logjam. Right now, I think, personally, I've got 3 long-term solutions in the outfield. The first one being Austin Hayes. The second being Anthony Santander, because I think he has shown consistent improvements offensively and defensively. I mean, this guy was a finalist for the Gold Glove, which is kind of crazy.
I think it's a little ridiculous. I mean,
it might speak more to the quality of right fielders in the American League.
Well, it is probably also the easiest position on the diamond to play.
Right. But he's gotten better there. You have to give him credit for that.
He made some spectacular plays. I don't know if he was solid defense. Like, he metrically, 8 defensive runs saved, but
yeah.
I don't know. I think you're right. I think it speaks more to the quality. He also only played 37 games. I don't know how you can give a guy that.
So give me Austin Hayes
it's good for him.
As a long-term solution. Give me Anthony Santander as a long-term solution. And give me Cedric Mullins as a long-term solution. Hear me out. I don't think Cedric Mullins is your answer for the future in center field. What I think Cedric Mullins is a long-term solution as a 4th outfielder.
Okay.
I don't think Cedric Mullins should be your opening day every year center fielder. He just doesn't give you enough offensively at this point unless he comes back in 2021 and hits like 400 with bunting every single at-bat. But he's great defensively, and I think he has a real opportunity to cement himself as a really good 4th outfielder if he isn't your everyday center fielder, because he can play any position in the outfield, more than likely, because if you're a really good center fielder defensively, you can probably play the corner outfields pretty well. And if he isn't going to be your answer every day, have him be your 4th outfielder. And I think he's a long-term solution there.
I just think this is just that spot at this point, you can kind of pencil him in, but also we have not seen Yusniel Diaz play yet.
Right.
We have not seen Ryan McKenna play yet. We have not seen Heston Kjerstad play yet. So I think that is it. Maybe for 2021, 2022, sure. But you look down the line to when this team is start to be really good again, and that position is going to be hard. And kudos to Cedric Mullins, because he had a much better year than most expected. He figured out exactly how to get on base and how to be valuable to this team. And he, of course, as Brandon Hyde said, probably should have been in consideration for a finalist spot for a Gold Glove because he was that good defensively. I just don't know if I can call him a long-term solution at this point.
I think there's going to be a battle in center field going forward between Austin Hayes and Cedric Mullins.
I think it's going to be an exciting. I mean, it's going to be a thrilling thing to watch. Maybe the most exciting thing to watch next year is the outfield group. And where Austin Hayes is going to be. They tried him out in left last year. They tried him out even in right, and he was solid, but he can also still play really good defensive center field. Is he going to be your long-term center fielder? Is he going to be are they going to shift him over to left? Where is Yusniel Diaz going to play? I don't think he's a center fielder. I think he's more of a corner outfielder.
I think Diaz is probably going to be a right fielder if I had to guess, which then what do you do with Anthony Santander? There's just There's a ton of prospects,
And then
you've got 3 guys at the major league level right now that I think have the ability to be answers in the outfield spot for years down the line.
Well, you also have Anthony Santander, Yusniel Diaz, and Heston Kjerstad. Not all 3 of them can play right field.
Well, certainly not with that attitude.
Not with any attitude, Brendan. Unless they split every game evenly and they carry all 3 of them on the 35-man roster that will keep expanding every single year.
The 35-man roster will consist of 17 outfielders.
Yeah.
I think that's the only way.
It's going to go from 26 to 28 to 31 to 35, and you just carry them for the whole year. No, but I mean, this outfield group is going to be fascinating to watch. And McKenna is another guy that can play center field that I think will get his shot in 2021. So how much we see McKenna, how much we see Diaz is going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah.
Should we talk about the pitchers?
We should.
Starting rotation. Who of the guys in the starting rotation do you think is a long-term solution?
I've got 2.5 long-term solutions in the starting rotation. First being John Means, because I don't know if John Means is going to be a starter in the Orioles rotation for 7-8 years, but I think for the next 3-4 years down the line, I would be surprised if John Means wasn't in your rotation. I think the second long-term solution I have is Dean Kramer. I think he showed you enough really good stuff last season that he has at least cemented himself as a starter for next season, I think beyond as well, because his stuff is really good. And I think Kramer has shown you enough flashes that he can be a really good starting pitcher. And that last start against the Red Sox inflated his ERA, so his season numbers didn't look that great. But I think Kramer, more so than Keegan Aiken, has cemented more of a role in the starting rotation. Keegan Aiken is my half because I think he is a long-term solution somewhere. I think Keegan Aiken could be a number 4, number 5 in the Orioles starting rotation if some of your other prospects don't pan out. But if some of the other prospects who are a little bit more highly rated than Keegan Aiken pan out, then maybe Aiken gets bumped to the bullpen. I think either way, he's going to be an effective pitcher for the Orioles. Whether it's the starting rotation or the bullpen remains to be seen. So I've got 2.5 in the starting rotation. Keegan Aiken being a toss-up between whether he's a solution as a starter or a reliever.
I'm with you there. I think Dean Kramer was, aside from that last start, even though his numbers are going to look just very similar to Keegan Aiken's at the end of the year, I think Dean Kramer, by the eye test, by the metrics, was the more impressive pitcher this year. He had 3 terrific starts against good teams. Yeah. He was outstanding. And it was just that 4th start that is to be expected, and that just inflates his ERA when you only make 4 starts. I think Dean Kramer has a real chance to be a good, maybe number 3 starter down the line.
Yeah.
Which it could be thrilling when you have D.L. Hall and Grayson Rodriguez at the top of that rotation.
Right.
And John Means, I think, has at least shown that he deserves a spot in the rotation. And the second half of the season that we saw from him was outstanding. So there's no reason to not call him a long-term solution at this point. But Keegan Aiken, I agree with you. I mean, he's not going to be a back end of the bullpen guy because of he doesn't have the repertoire for that. So if he can cement himself in the rotation, that'll help. But other than that, I think his spot on a team is probably going to be a 6th, 5th, long relief.
And maybe a swingman, too, if the Orioles need another guy in the rotation. The other 2 spots in the rotation, personally, I think are both problems. Alex Cobb, when he is healthy, I think has the potential to be a short-term solution. But my thing with Alex Cobb is that
he's never healthy.
Well, had obviously his injury issues. But my personal thing with Alex Cobb is that he is going to be taking up a spot in the rotation because you gave him a $30 million contract. But when you've got all of these prospects coming up, like an Alexander Wells, like a Michael Baumann, you want to start those guys.
Yeah, but not yet.
Maybe not yet, but I think a year or 2 down the road, you're probably going to be wishing that those guys were starting instead of Alex Cobb. And Alex Cobb, 2 years from now, right? He still has 2 years left on his deal.
He's got 1 year left.
Oh, I thought he had 2.
No, this is the last year.
Oh, well, I guess I'm just wrong then. But
yeah, I mean, he's got money backloaded. That's the problem. Is He has deferred money after the 2021 season, but this is his final year on his deal, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't have an issue with it. I think the ideal scenario is that he has an Andrew Cashner type season where he starts having a career year in his first 8 starts. They find a team like the Red Sox that is desperate for starting pitching, and they offload him somewhere and maybe eat some of the money on the back end of his contract. And then you have a spot open for a Michael Baumann, a Zach Lowther, and Alexander Wells. But I don't think he really hurts you to start the 2021 season, because I think that spot is not yet there for anybody. I don't think Bruce Zimmerman, was knocking down the door with his couple starts that he had under his belt. I think he was fine, but I don't think to start the year, I don't think Alex Cobb is taking a spot away from him. Maybe by July or August, he's going to be doing that.
Yeah, and that's where my issue becomes with Alex Cobb. If he's on and off healthy and you can't really get any trade value for him, and then he pitches at the back end of the season and is taking spots away from the prospects that you want to be pitching.
Yes.
So Cobb, not quite a problem, not quite a solution.
Yeah, I think at this point he's probably a short-term solution. He did pitch almost all of his starts that he was available for. He made in 2020. It's just a matter of, can he be healthy and can he have a good first half of the season? They don't even need a full good season from him. They need a good first half of the 2021 season from Alex Cobb in order to offload him. Yeah. All right, bullpen, I've got 2 guys who I think are long-term solutions, being Hunter Harvey and Tanner Scott. I think those are the 2 guys that you can look at and say that they will probably be in the Orioles bullpen for at least a few years down the line. There's other ones that are teetering the line a little bit. I think Paul Fry has the potential to be in the Orioles bullpen for a few years down the line, but as of right now, I would classify him as a short-term solution. The surprising thing is I was going through the bullpen. There are more short-term solutions than problems. Yeah.
Which is a big change from the year before. I've got Paul Fry, Valdez, Armstrong, and Lakins as short-term solutions. I think Lakins teeters the line of problem a little bit, but he was decent enough last year. I think really the only guy who you would classify as a problem in the Orioles bullpen for 2021 is Cole Sulser, who might not even be on the team next year.
And you may be forgetting about Dylan Tate, who I think has a chance to be a long-term solution as well.
He could be.
What we saw from Dylan Tate was pretty much what was hoped for him when they traded for him. So I think that Dylan Tate has a chance to stick in this bullpen long-term. I'm with you. I think Hunter Harvey, just what they have invested in him time-wise, years-wise, rehab-wise, they're going to hold on to him, I think, if they can. And they're going to see if he can be healthy and he can be productive. Down 2020 season for him, but I think he still has a chance, given the fact that he's got this blistering fastball and great off-speed. I think they still envision him as an 8th, 9th inning guy.
Yeah, he's got the stuff for it.
Absolutely.
He just needs to put it all together, and I think he was better in 2019 than he was in 2020. He'll admit that as well, that he had a bit of a down 2020, like you said. So I think we'll see a bounce back from Hunter Harvey, and hopefully we get a season where he doesn't have to deal with injuries.
Yeah. And Sean Armstrong, I think, is another guy that probably more of a short-term solution, even though he was outstanding in 2020. He was terrific. But I think that they will probably look to trade him because of his age. I'm there with you with Paul Fry, too. I think that
and could be a trade piece as well.
Could be a trade piece. Exactly.
But looking at the Orioles roster as a whole, there's a good amount of long-term solutions, and there aren't a lot of problem spots.
No.
Right now, I think the position group that you would look at and say, okay, that's probably the biggest problem spot is third base, because there's not really a short-term or long-term solution there right now. But we talked about the shortstop prospects again. I think one of those guys is pretty close to being an answer at third base.
Yeah, that's a problem that could be solved if we start seeing Gunnar Henderson in spring training taking reps at third base and he looks great and they decide to move him or whatever happens there. I think that's a real chance to be a long-term solution. Yeah, they're set. I mean, Michael Elias, when he took over this, there were a lot of problem areas, and there were some guys you squinted at in the system and you could say, okay, he could be a good guy down the line. They're pretty deep at most positions at this point in terms of minor league talent and prospect talent. and they just have a chance to grow that this offseason if they make some trades of some veterans as well.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say that you need to go out and make a ton of trades or sign anybody big in free agency. I think as of right now, it's just kind of a waiting game. You wait for those guys in the system to come up, and they'll fill those holes that you have on the team right now, like that fourth and fifth starter that the Orioles could be looking for. That's probably a problem spot right now. Like third base, you've just kind of got to wait out those prospects. And when they get there, hopefully they will turn in to the long-term solutions.
Exactly. Will be fun to watch this offseason. Of course, as always, stick with the MASN All Access Podcast. We will have you covered as MASN Sports will as well. Thanks to Bobby Blanco, by the way, behind the scenes. But we're not yet done because we still have Olivia Witherite, the great former MASN social manager, and, of course, the current Athletic social media manager there as well. I had her on to discuss Kim Ang and the article she wrote about her. Here's our conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now pleased to be joined by my good friend, my former boss and former coworker, Olivia Witherite, who is the manager of social engagement currently with The Athletic. You probably know her best from her days at MASN as the social media manager, marketing, digital. She did literally everything that was to be done at MASN behind the scenes. And, of course, you probably already follow her on Twitter. But, Olivia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Paulie. Missed you guys.
I figured we would probably start with going back and telling embarrassing stories from winter meetings of years past, and then start from there.
Okay, sure. How long is this?
This is going to be a multi-series interview here. But Olivia, let's start with the article that you just recently wrote for The Athletic, because you are not typically a writer for The Athletic. You weren't typically a writer for MASNsports.com, even though you occasionally dabbled in the writing side. But when you do write, it's always excellent because you always have a great command, I think, of the skill of writing. But the piece that you most recently wrote for The Athletic, which was a personal piece about Kim Ang, what led you to writing it? And were you encouraged by anybody, or was this something that you pitched and wanted to go forward with?
Yeah, so I wrote a tweet about how much the hiring meant to me personally as an Asian American woman. And one of my coworkers at The Athletic, one thing that I really enjoy about working here is that we're really encouraging newsroom. And so one of my friends who covers the Raiders actually reached out to me and said, "Hey, I saw your tweet. I think you should write something about it," which at the moment had not crossed my mind at all. Like you said, I'm a little rusty when it comes to writing, and I enjoy writing and like tweets and short form and things like that. So to kind of put something so personal into longer form was intimidating, but that's sort of how it came about. It's just an encouragement from someone on the staff, and I'm really glad that they did reach out.
And of course, Kim Ang is the first woman executive GM in baseball, and the first in professional American sports, in addition to being the second person of Asian descent to rise to the level of GM in baseball. When this announcement was made by the Marlins that Kim Ang had gotten that position after she had had numerous interviews over the years, and even had her name brought up when the Orioles were looking to hire a GM, a president of baseball operations, when they eventually hired Mike Elias. But numerous teams over the years had her name brought up, and she finally broke through and got the job. What was your reaction when the news broke a few days ago?
I was just so happy and ecstatic. Obviously, I knew who she was from, news cycles in the past, but all of those interviews had really never come to fruition. But I felt a sense of like personal pride. I see there is a lot to be said for representation and seeing someone who looks like you break through that glass ceiling. So it was just honestly elation, and it was just really amazing to see her. And I think even more so when she was introduced on Monday, just to see how she answered questions and fielded questions, not just about her being, a trailblazer in the industry, but also just how she spoke about the future of the game and the future of the Marlins within the Miami community. I just thought was really inspiring.
Yeah. And for anybody that hasn't heard her speak yet, publicly, she obviously is very, very intelligent and can speak very well about a wide range of topics. And the fact that you mentioned the interviews that she had before and the opportunities that were not afforded to her over the years, despite the fact that she was working in this industry and had a wealth of experience and probably a lot more experience than a lot of the people that were picked for GM's jobs ahead of her. What does that say about the state, not just of baseball, but of all of American sports and professional sports in particular, that it took so much and so many years for her to finally break through?
Yeah, I don't work like on the baseball opposite side of things, so I can't say I know everything as far as the intricacies of it go, but she obviously is overqualified for that role. I mean, she has multiple World Series rings. She was an assistant GM when she was like barely older than me, which is actually crazy to think about. So I think that it was a really long time coming, and I'm just happy to see her where she is today.
Yeah, and your reaction, obviously, I think was a reaction that a lot of people had across the industry, and there's a lot of talk also about what this means for a new generation, a younger generation of female baseball fans, of young girls watching this, and people of Asian descent as well watching this that are of a younger generation. What would a young Olivia's reaction to this be? And do you think that this would mean even more to a young Olivia to see somebody like this rise to that level and to have somebody to look up to in the world of baseball?
That's a really good question. I think when I was growing up in the 90s, I didn't really know that much differently. Like if I watched TV, most of the people on the kids shows I watched were white. And then when I started getting into baseball, the broadcasters and the writers that I read were white people, and a lot of times white men. So I think subconsciously I sort of just thought that that's the way things were. That's what entertainment looked like. That's what sports looked like. So I think younger Olivia would be maybe not realize the direct impact of it, but hopefully as young girls and young people of color are watching Kim Ng, on a national stage and in the public spotlight, they'll be able to see someone that looks just like them doing the same thing.
Yeah, and that's something that you talked about as well in your article, the kind of the way that you grew up with kind of a color blindness that your parents and generations before, I guess, kind of instilled in you as you went through a high school that was mostly white. And then you enter the field of baseball, which is, of course, predominantly white and predominantly male. In going through the writing process of this article, what kind of memories were you bringing up about, obviously you still work in baseball, but in particular, MASN and being around the ballpark every single day for so many years. What kind of memories do you have about kind of going through the baseball world and coming to the realization that color blindness is probably not the best way to go through this?
Yeah, so I was raised with a lot of like love and respect. That's what I was taught, but I just didn't realize, I guess, that like who I am as a person and like my descent and my heritage is something that I should be really proud of. So by the time I did make it to baseball, I was still kind of undergoing that like self-realization, I guess. And it sounds silly because this was not that long ago. I want to say it was, I guess, 2016 when Hyun-Soo Kim played for the Orioles, and I kind of looked around and saw like a lot more people who, looked like me and who cared about baseball and were there just to do their jobs. That's it, and I think that was sort of a wake-up call for me. And again, I was like well into adulthood then. I don't think it should have taken that long, but when I looked around and kind of saw again, like people who just looked like me going about their jobs and doing a really amazing work, I was like, oh, this is a lot different than what I'm used to on the everyday, which is what I had gotten used to, which was just, a lot of people who sort of looked the same and thought the same and talked the same, coming to the ballpark every single day.
Yeah, and having that kind of diversity, like you talked about, people that look the same, that talk the same, and then adding more voices that are not the same and more voices that come from different places. How important do you think that is for the future of baseball?
Huge. I mean, you look at a lot of these young guys coming up now, and then you look at someone like Kim Ang too, or just bringing a lot more voices and a lot more people who could be interested into baseball into the game. So I think it's really huge just to open those doors and broaden the horizons and get more people interested, and then say like, hey, look, here is what baseball is. I know it's a game that you and I love, and I think that the more people that can see it on a day-to-day basis, the better. So I'm hoping that this just really diversifies the fan base. And then when you do have a more diverse and open fan base too, that alone does a lot for the sport. So I'm definitely hoping that this hire and a lot of the guys starting to come up and debut in the next few seasons will have a lasting impact on the game.
Absolutely. And not just did you write a great article, but it also blew up on social media just a little bit. How great was that to see everybody kind of the reaction that you got to writing that article? Some big time reporters, some big time writers posting this, saying worth a read. What was your reaction to the article?
Okay, so I work in social. I love retweets, and when things go viral, not like this went viral, but get a lot of attention.
Sort of viral.
But then yeah, I guess. But then when you see something like that and it's so personal and it's about me, I'm like, oh my gosh, I like turn my tweet notifications off. I was like, I don't want anyone to like look at it. It's like I'm so much shyer, and I think that is why I work behind the scenes, is because I love seeing success happen to other people, and when I can help promote other people's work, that's awesome. When it was mine, I definitely had some anxiety, but I was really actually truly grateful for the people that had shared it. People within the Athletic were really awesome about sharing it, like Mark Carrig, who also wrote a really amazing piece on what it's like for his daughter, who is Asian, to grow up with someone like Kim Ang in the front office, and a lot of other people within the company, but then some others too outside of it. And, that's sort of, I guess, more than anything, I wrote this for myself. It was really therapeutic for me to kind of reflect on what this means to me in a grander scheme, like where I am personally. But if it impacted some other people, which I got some really nice notes and emails too, I'm happy that it did get some attention, even though I'm shy.
The only thing I am mildly upset about is that Kim Kardashian didn't retweet it. Knowing your history with Kim Kardashian retweets.
I know. So one Kim Kardashian retweet, which I think I have at the top of my resume now. It's all I ever need.
You should print it out and frame it.
Yeah, like, oh, are you good at social? Well, look at this tweet. Kim Kardashian retweeted my terrible tweet once.
Yeah, it was not even your best tweet by a lot.
By a lot. Like I expect her to go through all of my old content and peruse it, but whatever.
Of the tweets, we've talked about this on the podcast before because we've had you on the podcast back when you were a MASN employee, but do you still have favorite tweets from your times running MASN, Orioles, MASN National social media?
Oh my gosh, I do miss it because I just loved those fan bases. I was like so plugged in, and I sort of knew what would work and what people would react to and things like that. It was really fun. I don't know if I have a necessarily favorite tweet from MASN, but there are some good ones. They're all involved around some stupid pun. I think that is
yeah,
the baseline there.
I still think my favorite was the Red Sox JK tweet where they had the players' jersey names.
That's true. That was a really, really good one.
Yeah. What player was it on the Red Sox that had JK?
It was Joe Kelly.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Which, wow, full circle. Because then he made it the meme that keeps on giving. So, I was ahead of the curve.
Wow. Yeah. Maybe he was inspired.
Probably. He probably saw my tweet or the one that Kim Kardashian retweeted.
Yeah. Because everybody, the 400 million followers saw that as well. But yeah, Olivia, you're back in the Baltimore, Maryland area at the time being, of course, during this shutdown. Is it good to be back home? Obviously, he couldn't go to Orioles games over the summer, but at least to be kind of around the same area that you grew up and around Orioles fans?
It's cold. I got used to California weather real quick, so that's kind of a bummer. But on the flip side, I have eaten crabs like every single week, so a good trade-off. It is nice being back. Maryland is my home. I will always claim it as that, and I loved being here. I loved living in Baltimore City, and this place means a lot to me, so it is nice to be back.
Yeah, it's good to have you back, and it's good to have you on the MASN All Access podcast, because anybody who knows Olivia knows she doesn't like talking publicly if she can avoid it, and especially not about herself. So to get her to do this interview was, I think, a small miracle.
I think you're making my head bigger.
Olivia, thank you so much for hopping on. And of course, if you have an athletic subscription, one, if you don't, you should probably get it. But two, if you do, definitely check out Olivia's article on The Athletic about the hiring of Kim Ang as the Marlins GM. But Olivia, thank you so much.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks.